because well, we had thought originally of doing like a more complicated maker project, but I don't think you can expect these people to be able to go and like source these supplies. We wanted people to be able to participate for like very cheaply, because they would be able to see like, well, I can do a project with 30 kids for $20. So if you were to buy LEDs and batteries, that's one thing we can talk about. But I like expanding it to just like storytelling with light, because I think that it kind of takes it away from the copper tape circuits a bit more, which I know is going to be happening, and I think it also like enables more people to. It lowers the barrier to participating in this cycle too, and I want to have everyone possibly participate if they can. The other thing I really liked was how I think maybe it was Joe or Chad. One of you said like less facts. Oh no, it's Christina. Less facts about what drives us, and a little bit more about what we care about and what's at the heart of our practice. Because I love talking about that, and I think it's also really good for us as mentors to remind ourselves like, well, what do we love about what we do? What do we think is important about what we do in terms of like the space of where we're working, like informal out-of-school environments. That really stuck with me. Go to anything that you want to throw in there?
Those are kind of the same things that I wrote down, but just to add on a little bit about broadening the tools that you can use a little bit. I really like that too, because it takes the focus away from the tool and puts it more on being creative and coming up with a project just using something new. I think that sounds really good to me. And then I also heard you talking about how important it is to give more context about where we're working and why and how that will be a part of the newsletter and a part of introducing the prompt, and that there will be interest among the participants to learn more about this program.
And I think at ALA specifically, a lot of librarians were really just wanted to know, like, well, what supplies do you have? What can I buy? What projects can I do? Which is a little like, which is like cool, and I'm happy to give out that information. I feel like if we give some examples of like, here's what a day in the life of Maker Dawn looks like, I feel like that also gives a little bit of context, and people find that, people love that stuff. I found that people have found that very helpful. And like, here's like a list of example supplies that we can't seem to keep enough of, or we can't seem to keep in stock at our branches. Because I think that would also give some people options on how to do their storytelling with light if they see some examples of things that we use.
Do you think it would be interesting at all to talk about the way that we use a lot of recycled materials, or just kind of everyday things that you could get for free or really inexpensively? Yeah, I see people nodding.
Yeah, absolutely. Everyone else is nodding too, yeah. Yeah, I think one thing I'd like to talk about certainly is how we've been able to do this, like how important it is for us to develop like low-cost, high-impact tools and projects. So certainly using recycled materials, but just trying to get the most bang for your buck out of supplies. And not all technology needs to be expensive. You don't have to buy a ton of iPads to make your programming legit. You know, you don't even have to use a computer. You can use things like a flashlight.
Yeah, I think that's awesome. So you got a little response there in the chat. So good. And then the second part of the protocol, you probably have already touched on it a little bit. We want to sort of ask, like, from a facilitation standpoint, is there anything you're thinking? Because the places I think you've already hit on it are when you start talking about what you want to include in the newsletter and why with your audience. You're already talking about the facilitation and sort of, and when you have questions about like who comes to the hangout, you're thinking about the facilitation. So. The question specifically from my protocol, I'm reading in the chat. Oh yeah, so explain the name, perhaps.
I can comment. Well, just that Maker Dawn is an interest-driven name, so even.
Oh, okay. Got it. And then, so this is the place where we want you to try and talk a little bit about. Let's see, I put it in the chat. Did I? There. So what would you want to emphasize, be aware of, or prepare if you were facilitating? And again, you've touched on this a little bit, but I would just ask you to try to reiterate and think about facilitation for 5 minutes. And even if you end up kind of restating some things, I think that's fine.
Okay. I might be explicit about, I mean, I guess I would be explicit about, one thing we could talk about that we've already talked a bit about is kind of like not fetishizing technology and not, like, even though we have a maker program, everything that we do isn't always so focused on like robotics, and how we also are trying to focus on making programs with teens, so participatory design and like letting kids steer the projects, and keeping in mind also that when we design projects or when we buy tools, we're thinking a lot and having a lot of conversations about gender. So it's like, is this, and gender and like non-dominant youth. So is this going to be a kind of project that kids are going to want to participate in, or kids that we work with are going to find interesting? And the way that we determine that is, well, you either like show them the tools and they vote with their feet, or they, or we have them come up with the materials with us, or come up with the projects with us. So I guess like, yeah, highlighting that all of our work is very much driven by a ton of conversations with mentors, but also with teens. So like participatory design on all levels. There are many mottos that we have, but Goda, do you want to talk about the first thing, about what we might want to be explicit about while we're facilitating this?
I'm not sure. You mean aside from the participatory nature of the way that projects develop?
Yeah, I mean, I guess that's kind of just talking about us. But now I'm starting to think about, like, while we're facilitating this MOOC and people are sharing stuff with us, is there anything that we really need to describe to them? Or, like, let them know as they're doing this stuff?
I can't really think of anything else.
Yeah, because it's not like I don't want to tell them how to make the project, or like what's a valuable story with light and what's like less valuable. But I think talking about like the way that you encourage, I think if anything we should say something like explicit about like not turning down other people's ideas, and how that's one thing that we talk about, is like getting everyone to participate at some level and never telling anyone like that's a stupid idea or that's wrong. I mean, I guess, you know, they're educators, they know this stuff, but it's just something that we do in practice and something that we talk about. Can you think of any mottos that we would have? Oh, I can think of a motto. I mean, this is just something that I feel like we do in our practice period. It's like, and people love this too, whenever I've told it to people, it's like, think big, start small, move fast. And I feel like a lot of, when you're planning like things like lesson plans, or even when you're planning, like, for example, like this summer with the grant that we're working on right now, I feel like you could put hours and hours and hours into planning like every single step. Like, okay, we're going to give the kids an LED, we're going to give them a battery, we're going to show them how to put it together, then we're going to have them do this project, and this project. And with this kind of thing, I feel like you have a different momentum when you just throw out a bunch of materials, you give it to a bunch of smart people, and you're like, what can you make with this? Or why don't you try and figure it out? Or if you give a bunch of materials to a kid and they kind of are fussing with a little bit, and then you give them just like a little bit of a push, but then you know when to step back from that stuff. So it's like basically like the think big, start small, move fast. It's a way of moving forward with an idea, I suppose, and it's a way of us moving, I guess, as an organization and thinking about us getting tools into kids' hands as opposed to like trying to plan what's going to happen when we get all these tools into kids' hands, and like as opposed to us being like, what are the learning objectives here? So instead of doing that, we're putting the tools in their hands and then like observing,
seeing what happens, and then putting more tools or bringing. Right. Yeah, it's kind of planning happens on a day-by-day basis based on what happened the previous day and how people were.
Yeah, and getting the kids to reflect.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And getting them to reflect on what happened too, and getting the kids to try and articulate like, well, what did you learn here? Or what happened when you did this versus when you did this? Because so many surprising things happen when you just like step back a little bit and just let the kid like tinker and mess things up, and when you let them be surprised. But I guess that's probably a different motto then, huh? It's like, let yourself be surprised. Let yourself fail a little bit is one, or let your wheels spin, but don't get stuck in the mud.
Well, and don't be stuck with your plan if your plan stops working at a certain point, or if something happens to change the way that the program is or the project is developing.
Okay, so don't be stuck with your plan. Don't be afraid to fail, because fail teaches you resilience, resiliency. Don't be afraid to fail. Be flexible.
Don't be afraid to let your students fail.
Yeah, I'm going to pause you both only because I think that you've done a fantastic job of thinking through this, and I wouldn't want you to feel like you have to work with each of those frames because you don't.
Okay, yeah. Thanks.
And I also think, I think that's just a great place for us to sort of stop and pick up, like with a little bit of response. So the way we typically try to envision this is we try to use the same frames, but we don't address them all. And then we kind of try to like do a little bit of a silly role play, like if you both skipped town and you weren't going to facilitate the MOOC, we just had to pull off this plan even though we aren't Maker John and we don't know really exactly what you're getting at. We just had to do our best with what we've heard. This is how we would take it up. So the idea that hopefully these ideas resonate or inform you, but they're not meant to critique, right? Because we've got a half picture of what you're planning. So now we just sort of talk as if we were going to take it over. Okay? So go ahead, Chad and Christina. Talk as if you were going to take it over.
No, I'm going to break the protocol, Joe.
What?
Yeah, sorry. No, a lot of what you said, I would like all of it. I don't know what the word I'm looking for is. Resounded with me. I think last night on the Hangout we were talking about play and how sometimes play is great for the mentor, the teacher, the facilitator, because when you watch kids at play, you get an idea of how they learn and self-organize. And I was working on a teaching kit today to try to frame a coding club with, at its core, the same kinds of facilitative approaches that you described, letting the kids go and asking them reflective questions and trusting them to make something with the materials in front of them that's quality work, that's personally meaningful to them. So I'm completely onboarded with that. I'm just going to share my usual struggle with you as someone who kind of plays around with ideas and people who work in, I call them informal learning spaces, and I just mean that as something other than schools, which I see as really rigidly formal. So here are the parts where I was thinking. You spoke a lot correctly, I think, about the fetishization of technology and how educators of all sorts need to understand it's not just having the stuff, and it's not also telling the kids exactly what to do with the stuff. It's having enough of an enriched environment that kids from all walks of life can walk in and kind of find something they want to do, feel like there's something they can learn, something that they can make. And I think you'll have an audience that groks that, and in some cases is living that, and in some cases wants to live that. but also has questions about how to, think big, start small, move fast in a formal learning environment. So it might be useful to get them thinking, just to ask them how they would do that. How would you live this motto in your classroom, in your space, in your library? You come at it from a questioning standpoint rather than an explicative standpoint. And the other thing you said that really caught my ear that I think would be really interesting to unpack in the discussion is you said you kind of made light of having specific learning objectives, but you also talked about wanting kids to be more reflective. So I wonder if there are learning objectives that we could unpack during the Make With Me during the week about how does this approach actually teach problem solving better? How does it teach decision making better? How does it teach design thinking and systems thinking better than anything we could assign kids or any single project we could make everyone in the grade do? That would be really interesting, and I think of lasting value to the participants working in formal spaces if they had a chance to work with you and to listen to your experiences and your stories and your expertise and think about how they actually could have some really specific, powerful learning outcomes for their kids that are not the kind of learning outcomes I think we would agree are kind of trivial and adulterous. So I apologize for breaking the protocol, but those things sparked a lot of thinking. I wanted to share it before I lost it.
Of course.
I think building off of some of that, Chad, I feel like this is one thing that I was thinking, and I don't think it's counter to what you're thinking. I'm thinking that the sort of theory of action behind the MOOC. I mean, a lot of the theory that the MOOC is built on is, both other MOOCs that preceded it, connected learning itself. We're trying to, so this idea that you're bringing participatory design in explicitly is very exciting, because we've also been trying to design this to be that way. So to really surface that as an explicit intention, I think is really important. And we've been designing it so that educators themselves have the experience to think think big, start small, move fast themselves, to then help to get to what Chad's questions are. So it's not necessarily what I want to keep from doing is saying that one has to come before the other, but that I feel like it's a theory of action behind the work that teachers also get this chance to think big, start small, move fast. And so I think that that's very exciting. And I'd want to add, and have fun do, I want to encourage you as facilitators to also have fun doing that too, because that's, we've had a lot of play and a lot of fun doing these things ourselves, and really getting to oh wait, how does this help me problem solve these learning objectives that Chad was talking about? We can start to see them in our own selves when we do it that way. So I really appreciate that, and Chad might want to respond to that. So I just wanted to. I heard you talking about, in your participatory design processes, really talking about gender, talking about non-dominant youth, which brings up issues of race and class, and class is, demographics in general, and I think that and really important things to bring into the mix. So I would really want to encourage you to do that, and really make that explicit in your work. It also made me think, if I saw some student work, I might respond by being inspired by it, just to follow the protocol. We can bring, student work can be a really powerful mentor text for us here. So that's something I'd want to encourage you to think about too. And the student work as well as the student reflection.
Chad, do you want to respond to any of that?
I think what Christina said it stands.
Right on.
Yeah, I don't have a big response except that the things that she said it would be good to make explicit, both about the participatory practice and gender, and providing these learning spaces for youth outside of power and privilege are things we should be discussing. Absolutely.
Privilege.
Participatory learning for all is what we need. We have participatory learning for a few at some schools, but the idea of participatory design and learning for all is really foreign to formal learning spaces, and it absolutely should be.
Awesome. Yeah, and I had a couple things on my notepad. I wanted to reiterate the part about what I'd heard you talk about with gender and non-dominant youth. I think that's really important also. And then the other thing, when you talked about the importance of the failures, I might be explicit about how valuable it would be to the community if we didn't hide our failures, but instead shared them. And that maybe, you know, if we saw a bunch of failed attempts at telling stories with light, that would be awesome too. So I think those were my 2 notes. So I think that's pretty much what we've got. So I want to hear you talk back, or if you have clarifying questions. So maybe say back what you heard and any clarifying questions.
Okay, I can start if that's okay. So I heard, Chad, I heard you talk about learning objectives and thinking about learning objectives maybe differently than having concrete. This activity will teach this fact or this skill, which I think is really important, but also skills like cooperation, independent thinking, creative thinking, creating in the world the things that you see in your head or that you imagine. Those are also really valuable skills. So that was nice to hear you talk about, and I think that makes sense to include. In terms of, and showing student work sounds like a really good idea to me too. So I think thank you for that. The clarifying questions. I wanted to ask 2 different things. One is both Christina and Joe. You guys said that it would be good to talk about gender and demographics and how we're working with non-dominant youth, but I guess in what way would that be addressed best, or what kinds of things about that would be useful to talk about? And then the other question was just how important, both in the newsletter and in what we share in the communities and in the Hangout, how useful are specific examples of projects we've done with the youth at our sites and things like that.
Chris, do you want to take that?
Sure. In what way? Sometimes we talk about at writing projects this a process of hard talk. I guess sometimes we talk when we really actually talk about race, access, privilege, you know, and I think it would be fascinating if a conversation started that way. I don't necessarily want to make you feel responsible for that, but I think that you have a lot to offer about how you're creating spaces for exactly what Chad said, which I believe he said that so often we are creating participatory spaces for dominant youth, and but not everyone, and that you know that we really have an equity issue in the connected learning field that we have to figure out. Like, you know, we know that social capital, you know, allows for more connections and all that. So, I mean, I'm bringing up a lot of words and stuff, so I don't feel like it has to be all that complex, but I think that surfacing the fact that you're thinking about it, that your inquiries are about it, that you consider it, and you're in conversation with kids about it, not it as if it's a thing, but you're in conversation about these issues with youth, and then you're designing together with youth, considering lots of different factors, including some complicated factors that and I think that that's just really important to bring into the mix, and I don't feel like you need to feel responsible, though, for engaging everybody around that. I just think it would be of the community would appreciate it, I think, and different things could surface from it. I don't know if anybody else wants to.
Only thing that comes to my mind when you say you don't want them to feel responsible about that, I would totally agree, and I would say that your level of specificity is super helpful. Like, we do these things because we're trying to reach non-dominant youth. We try to bear this in mind when we're working with non-dominant youth, or what that really means to you. Any level of specificity in your own practice is just you talking about you and your approaches, and then let them abstract what that means for them in their classes, etc. Because your insights that are specific to your work, I think, really inform our work. And that's a responsibility, is just, the extent to which you want to share it, it would be welcome, and it would be food for our consideration. So it's our responsibility to keep it going if you put out specifics and you start touching on those issues.
Yeah, it's a whole community responsibility is what I meant to surface equity issues and talk about this. Thank you, Jim.
Yeah. So we are about at time. I definitely want to leave room for more if you have more questions or anything. At the same time, what I'll do is just send you a little wrap-up email to kind of explain some logistics between now and then, but also know that you can reach out anytime for support. So
great. This has been really, really helpful. Thank you.
Sure. I'm going to throw a link into the chat. This is funny because it's a link co-designed and built for maybe the copper tape people, as we might term this discussion. But it's just an example of kind of a teaching kit to different activities that we co-designed completely with their input to host on WebMaker for Mozilla. Just to kind of surface the work, highlight it, and highlight the kind of facilitation it takes maybe to approach more participatory and systems-based and design-based thinking with youth, even though there are some really specific activities in here. But I'm just going to put it in there, and as you're thinking, if it would be of any use to Maker John to have another open platform to share not exemplar activities that have to be followed to the letter, but rather activities that showcase how this learning and how this facilitation works. I think it'd be great to co-design stuff with you. I love all the projects I've seen from MakerJohn.
Cool.
I'm just going to pop it in there, and if there's anything useful in it at the teaching kit or activity level, let me know, and that's something we can certainly work on together.
And with my NWP hat on too, I just wanted to thank Maker John for taking on a make cycle in the MOOC. It's really awesome, and we're really, really excited to get to learn with you and get to do this with you. So really appreciate it.
Yeah, and this is also a really great opportunity for us to I don't know, just like reflect on our practice and talk to other mentors about it, especially because we're in the middle of just this really intense summer. It's hard to find that time to be able to be reflective, and to be reflective with people who are outside of our organization and outside of, the 12 mentors that we work with. So I think this is going to be really good.
Awesome, yeah. And yeah, I thank you guys so much for your We're so excited to have you involved. We look forward to learning with you. So just cheers all around. Thanks a lot. And I have copied everything that's in the chat, and I've just dropped it in. Everything's going into a Google Doc, and then I'll make sure that's in the email I send you.
Okay.
Chad always says these like very deep and profound things in the chat, and then you accidentally close it. You're like, oh crap!
There has to be some ephemera, right? Not everything can be preserved forever, or else it will lose value.
Capture it all.
Somebody captured a picture of Joe looking like a bug last night. That was pretty good.
Thank you, Joe and Chad. Thank you for organizing, Joe. It was awesome.
Thanks, everyone. Good night.
Thanks, guys. Bye.
Good night. Bye, guys.